Our next session is all about teamwork. Explore how partnerships, open collaboration, and culture of security and open-mindedness lead to a better performing security practices. Please welcome AWS's Clayton Smith for his talk, Strong Cloud Security is a Team Sport.
Hi, thank you for welcoming me into your screens, your offices, who knows, maybe even your couch, could be other places, your car. If so, please don't drive. But thank you for joining me today to talk about how strong cloud security is truly a team sport. So let's start with a little bit of talk about team sports. So team sports is something that's absolutely near and dear to myself and my family. I played high school basketball, not very well, but I did play. My wife played high school basketball. She played high school softball. She also played club level rugby in college, which was crazy. And luckily I didn't know her then because I would have totally told her not to do it. But sports is a big part of our lives. You'll see my little guy, for instance, here, he plays soccer and basketball. My older son, he played football in New Mexico, and we used to live in Albuquerque. Now I'm in Austin, Texas. But he played football for the state championship team when he played. He's now out of college, excuse me. But even going to sports and participating in sports and watching sports, all of these are just absolute passions of our family. But there's a lot to be learned from sports. And I hope that we make this analogy really work today as we start talking about how to bring team to your security practice. And so that's going to be my goal today, is to bring you along on this journey to show you how team really can equal a great security posture. So let me introduce myself. I'm Clayton Smith. I'm a principal security specialist with AWS. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here. If you'd like to find my contact information, please just scan the QR code in the bottom of your screen. But let's go on and continue talking about how strong cloud security is truly a team sport. Notice how I keep adding the truly. I just feel like it gives more gravitas. So we're going to talk about really the teamwork discussion from 3 different levels. So the first is really understanding the roles and responsibilities to build that winning game plan in your security practice. The second is, how are you going to build out your team with the absolute best partners that the industry has to offer? And this is important. Think about it again. Go back to my sports analogy. Teams are built during the off season. Teams are built during the draft. So how are you, with your security practice, how are you going to build out the best network of partners? And then finally, and probably the thing that I'm most passionate about, and you'll tell because I'm going to spend the majority of my time talking about how you're going to enable your team with a winning culture. We're going to call it a culture of security. So join me. So let's start talking about the understanding of the roles and responsibilities to really build this team. And in order to understand the roles and responsibilities, you really got to understand the foundation by which cloud service providers, especially AWS, the foundation that we've built this on. So many of you have probably heard of our shared responsibility model, but it's so foundational that I want to make sure that we're all coming at it from the same direction. So the first layer of this is going to be security of the cloud. That's what, in our case, AWS is responsible for. It's the underlying infrastructure, the underlying network that resides there, the hypervisor, in our case, Nitro, the physical security of the buildings, the physical security of the actual servers themselves. The list goes on and on, but this is what we're responsible for. These are the things that, although you're interested in them, we have these taken care of, and we do so. We publish those through a whole series of attestations, especially as it pertains to compliance and regulation. So we share all of that. So these are the things that AWS has already taken care of for you, so to speak. The second area, though, is going to be that security in the cloud. And those are all the nuances where you get to decide how you're going to secure your data. So for instance, this is things like data security, identity and access management, confidential information. Where are you going to put it? How are you going to store it? What's public? What's not? What tools are you going to use to detect threats in your environment? All of these are going to be that security in the cloud. So the first step in understanding your team is to know who has what role and who has what responsibility. Who's the point guard? Who's the center? Who's the forward? Those are all basketball analogies. If you're not a big basketball fan, that's where I'm going with this. So who's going to be the ball distributor? Who's going to be the guy that's in the post or gal that's in the post that's working down low? And so for this component, obviously the security of the cloud, that's stuff that we already have taken care of. But the security in the cloud, AWS provides a whole series of tools, we call them services, for you to be able to use to do that security in the cloud. And there's no expectation that you will use all of these services. You may use some, you may use none, but we've certainly put a lot of time and effort into building out this service catalog so that a lot of the things, the nuances that you're going to bring to bear, we want to provide you with the tools so you can secure your part of the cloud, so the security in the cloud. But, and this is where we really do transition, you've got to build your team with partners. At AWS, we don't claim to have everything in the security space done. We rely so heavily upon our partners. And this ecosystem of partners is incredibly special for you as customers. So we have such a large community and they integrate with us in so many different ways. As you can see, there's a lot of industry logos on here. This is literally the smallest slide that you could imagine about all the different partners. We have so many, but obviously one that brought us together today is going to be Qualys. And so Qualys has been an amazing partner of ours with lots of integration across all of our different portfolios and all of our different services. This is incredibly important as you start to look at how you're going to secure your environment. Which are the partners that you're going to bring along for the journey, and what is it that they add? So I'll give you an example of one area where we definitely need to partner with our partners. And that's going to be things like on-premise security. You may want to have your on-prem security and your cloud security. You may want to have similar, if not the same tools running in both of those. Well, most of the AWS tools are designed to provide security within AWS, not necessarily to your on-prem infrastructure. So that's where many of our partners fill a gap that we just simply don't have. Or maybe it's that you want to bring data together from many different infrastructures, in which case some of our partners are really great about that. In fact, that's something that Qualys does just an amazing job of. In fact, here at AWS, we actually use Qualys. So, there's a lot to be said for the partners that you select and be very specific as to the reasons why you're bringing in those partners. But I do want you to know from an AWS perspective, we absolutely see the benefit in including our partners, and we are just intimately involved with everything that they're doing, and they are working directly with our service teams to ensure those integrations on behalf of you, the customer. But let's talk, since Qualys has brought us together today, let's use one example, and I literally mean one example because there are so many examples. So if you look down at the bottom, the URL there will give you many, many more examples, and I'm sure your Qualys team can give you a ton, and obviously we have a lot of documentation. But if you want, you can scan that QR code, and that will actually bring you to this URL and give you so many more resources and information that you can leverage. So Qualys, this one example though, would be where we have Security Hub in the middle. Now, Security Hub is our CSPM, our Cloud Security Posture Management tool, but it's also a great aggregation point for all of the different services that not only we have, but third parties. And in this case, we're using this as an example for Qualys and their vulnerability information, just one of the many things that Qualys does. But can you imagine how much more powerful it is when we have the Qualys vulnerability information actually going into Security Hub that then is helping to add more data to our whole threat picture, and then being able to share that even further with remediation actions or other partners like analytics partners, or in this case, maybe Slack actually initiating a Slack message saying, we found that you had a vulnerability and it also correlates with an open port that maybe you have. So these are really important things, and this is an area where Qualys integrates with us so very well. But this is, again, just one example, and probably one of the most basic examples of where Qualys and AWS partner together so well. So again, be looking for those partners that you want to join your team to make your security posture even better. Now let's move on. So of course, I told you that enabling your team with culture is something that's near and dear to me. So let's open with, first of all, discussion between the culture of security versus a security culture. Now, these are deliberate phrases that we use, and that we use culture of security. And the reason why is it's a top-level message that actually cascades throughout the organization and applies to everyone. whereas security culture is really something that's more internal to the security department. So think of it as something more inclusive as we talk about. Culture and people is one of the hardest parts of the digital transformation. And so we think that this is somewhere where you can really, if you leverage this and figure out how to really build that culture of security, you can really expand your security practice. So some questions that I'll pose as we kind of go along, maybe for you to think about on your own is, have many of you feel like you've reached this culture of security? If so, how? And if you haven't, who could you reach out to? Many of the partners, many of the people that are probably presenting today, or even some of your colleagues at other companies. How did they build out their security organization and build this culture of security? So think about that. We're going to move on. For those of you that don't know, this is Andy Jassy. He's our CEO of Amazon. He was actually the CEO of AWS prior. But this is a quote from him: "Security and operational excellence are job zero." Why do I have a slide of our CEO except to hopefully mean that he can see this and know that I'm so impactful that he should give me just a big raise? But no, it's really not about that. It's about making very public statements to gain organizational buy-in. He's really talking to two groups when he makes these statements. He's talking to our customers, because obviously our customers need to know that the platform that they're on is incredibly secure, and that security is something that is just near and dear to our hearts, because you're trusting us with your data, with your customers. And so you've got to be confident in that. But the other cohort that he's really speaking to is internally. He's speaking to the organization itself. And so having this support from a top level exec really drives downstream impact. And that's why he does these things. So as an example that I wanted to point out is, and if I have any CISOs that are on this meeting right now, I hope you get this level of exposure to CEO. But every week, our CISO and our CEO actually meet to talk about security. There's 1 hour on the schedule every week for those two to talk. And furthermore, there's more time with the CISO and the service leaders to actually talk about security as well. So we make security a priority really down the organization. I think that it makes a big difference. Another part of the culture of security that we have here at AWS is product teams can slip ship dates if it's to make a product more secure, or if it's to address a situation with the security of a solution. And the reason why we do that is we want people to feel empowered to put a stop and not have to worry about being penalized in order to make a service secure. Ultimately, having a secure service is number one. And security is really a true partner within the business, which we'll talk more about, but it's not the Department of No. It's absolutely, and unfortunately, that's what some security professionals have been given the moniker of. I just go to them and they're just going to say no. I don't want to go to them because they're going to say no. So that's not appropriate. So as you're thinking about these things, think about, what is your CEO saying on security? Is there a way that you can influence that messaging? Who owns the overall security risk at your organization? And how is performance handled with your development teams as it pertains to securely shipping? And this goes back to that whole shift left, which is actually something we're going to address here in just a second. So as I move on to talk about tickets, you may be asking yourself, well, why are we talking so much about AWS? And let me tell you why, and I should have opened with this, is I like to use this as a case study for the things that are going well. AWS, we have a long history. We've been a very fast growing technology company. We've paid a lot of the tuition of learning how to build this culture. So really using AWS as a case study. So maybe you can take a few nuggets from this and say, hey, those are the things that I can apply to my organization. So let's talk about tickets for a second. We have a culture here that everything's a ticket. You want a marker for a whiteboard? Cut a ticket. If there's a spill somewhere, cut a ticket. If you need a new badge, cut a ticket. If you think that there's something wrong with the security, cut a ticket. You see a phishing email, cut a ticket. So why do we do this? Well, I think it's really that culture of having tickets is that everything's a ticket. It builds that muscle memory. It builds that awareness and that familiarity with how to cut a ticket. And it's very intentional because it drives a behavior. You're so used to cutting tickets that cutting a ticket for something that's security related really doesn't feel like it's such a big deal. So we try to reduce that gravitas. So we actually get people speaking with our security teams. We want to make it psychologically easy, enforce a culture of escalation, and certainly not have a culture of blame, because that's what we've unfortunately seen with some organizations is, you brought me something that wasn't a security issue, you wasted my time. That's not at all here. And in fact, the next slide will really cover that. So think about within your organizations, do you make it easy to report security concerns? And what are your thoughts on ticketing? I know some hate it. Some in the room may very well be right now rolling your eyes and saying not more tickets. But I'll tell you that I've spoken to a lot of organizations that have implemented this, and they've really found it effective at prioritizing and improving that communication between your whole team, the whole organization, and the security team. So here at AWS, we really strongly believe there's no consequence for reporting something in error. We would prefer to hear about that and investigate it rather than not hear about it at all. And this is part of that culture of security that we really just bang on. So we want to make the right thing easy. We want to make the wrong thing hard. We want tickets. We want people to feel comfortable opening tickets for anything. And we do not goal on reducing tickets. And this is something I've talked to. Luckily, I think most in our industry have gotten away from this. But there was a time where one of your key performance indicators may very well have been reducing the number of tickets. If you think about that, that drives a bad behavior, because it could just mean that you're reducing the amount of security events that are actually being reported. So we don't use that as a key performance indicator. Instead, we look at what are actually the security trends? Are we addressing those quickly? How are we dealing with the security issues that are coming up? Not if we have less tickets, because that could just be that we're doing a better job. More tickets could very well be that we're doing a better job of sharing that culture throughout the organization. And this is also how we scale. This is how we drive behavior. If you think about it, none of us that I'm sure are watching this think, we have as many security people as we could possibly have. It is a tough industry to find really qualified people. So this is one of the ways that we scale. We pull everyone in on the team. Everyone is looking for security. Everyone has that on their mind. And I think that's a really big part of our culture of security. Automation helps us get through a lot of these tickets, and certainly we make everything easy to report. So think about, be honest with yourselves. How many of you have encouraged your teams to reduce the number of tickets? Is that a key KPI? How might you measure security trends in business if you're not utilizing tickets to be the metric of reducing? And does your culture actually encourage the reporting of security issues? And if so, how are you doing that? And if you're doing it well, I would encourage you to share that with your colleagues. I host things like CISO circles and other mechanisms for customers to be able to speak with one another, because security professionals cooperating with one another, either in the same industry or cross industry, I think is really where the value is to improve the overall posture of a business in general. So we drive this idea of culture of yes or culture of yes and. I think it's really important for me to point out that our CISO is the only one that's empowered to say no. And so everyone that works for the office of CISO or has any role in security is not empowered to say, no, you can't do that. That would have to be escalated up to the CISO. Instead, it's yes or yes and, or maybe yes but. So take a situation where maybe a developer brings something forward. They've used non-standard libraries. They built something that just doesn't look as secure as it could be. How might you address that? Well, in our case, we'd say, yes, you could do it that way, but have you considered using approved libraries? Have you considered using this resource guide to tell you how to build securely? So those are very important differentiators, whereas, there's been this struggle with security teams where it's just like, no. And so what happens is developers typically don't want the culture to shift left. They don't want security involved early because you're just going to mess them up and you're going to say no. Instead, with our culture, we really want security at the forefront. We want that all the way to the left. We'll talk about a little bit of how we do that here in just a second. Let's see. We believe in 3-click wikis so that people can get information very easily. We don't want them to be searching for too long. We want to make it easy. We'll actually have security go and sit with dev teams at times and other business units to understand their needs, and vice versa. So those teams will also come and sit with security, understand what they go through. I think that's really powerful. And making security really a true business partner. So how many of you, think about this. How many of you think you're being perceived as the Department of No? Has anyone successfully changed this perception? If you have, again, share it with your colleagues. We think ownership is obviously one of the keys to enabling security at scale. And I really spoke about that, about how we want to push that ownership throughout the organization so we can have more security people. We can have more security-minded people driving that culture forward. So we have cradle to grave ownership for security with our GMs for each service. And an example is, we've acquired companies in the past where security issues come up and they're not familiar with our culture. So they send the security guy to the CISO meeting to respond to whatever security concern was found. That meeting gets stopped until the GM comes. The GM is the one that's ultimately responsible, and they have ownership and drives that ownership throughout the organization. No one person is going to be on the hook just because they have a security title. So we distribute this security ownership, as I was kind of getting at. The service team is really the owner of the individual, of the security of what they build and what they run and what they're delivering to customers. The security team, though, is responsible for enabling that and also responsible for the overall security of AWS. And this ownership model really drives some interesting behaviors because those service teams, they want to make sure that they're shipping securely, and it is a passion of theirs, and they're also going to want to learn how to best do that. Which brings us to probably, when I do this presentation, probably the thing that people ask me the most about is our Security Guardians program. So our Security Guardians program is a volunteer program where people within the development teams, they raise their hand. By the way, it can be cross-functional. It could be even PR, marketing. It doesn't have to be the development team. Someone raises their hand and says, I want to be a member of this. I want to be enabled. I want to learn more about security. And then I want to take that information. I want to go back to my team, and I want to be a part of that security review process. As a result of doing that, teams that have a security guardian have actually reduced the amount of time it takes to go through the security review process by roughly about 30 or so percent. So it's really impactful for people to go through this. And the question I get asked often is, well, do they get paid extra to be in the security guardians? What happens? Why do they want to do this? And so again, it goes back to, we've done all the groundwork to have a culture of security. This is important. This is an elevated position for people. So no, this is not a guaranteed promotion. Certainly goes into it, certainly shows initiative and all the things, bias for action and all these leadership principles that we hold dear. But no, this is, they get a phone tool, which is like a digital sticker, but they are looked at as the security person on their team, and they know all the best practices. And like I said, guardians in our team are in all teams, including HR, by the way. I should have said that, which people think of as kind of odd, but even HR needs to have someone thinking about security. So think about, do you have a similar program? I've heard it called all kinds of different names in organizations. Many people have built this out. I think it's an incredible program. So think about, if you haven't done it, we have some tips on how to do so. Please reach out to me. But it is a very powerful program. And if you don't have one, what would prevent you from doing it? Really think about that. Could you build an enablement program pretty easily to empower teams to be so strong with security that they could be helping you, again, building that scale and empowering them, frankly, and helping their career? Because having security as a level of knowledge that they have is going to help their career. So it's good all the way around. So now you may be asking yourself, why does he have a picture of an otter up on the screen? Well, do keep in mind, for those of you that maybe saw my LinkedIn post, I'm also the guy that wore a Letterman's jacket to pitch the presentation that you're watching right now. But no, in all fun, our Optimism Otter, this is our mascot. This is our unofficial mascot for security. And think about, why would we do this? Positive, optimistic, here to help. The otter is not going to tell you no. The otter just wants to have fun. But it drives that culture of yes. But the main thing that I want to talk about is about how we look at the messaging. And I really hope that you see this from a public perspective, from a public perception perspective, is we don't lead with fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We don't do that internally. We do our best not to do it externally. And I would say, if you ever see us doing that in our marketing, please call that out. Call someone like me immediately and tell us, because we want to see that. We don't think that that's a productive way to sell our services or even to talk internally. So, how do we position our work? Is it virus fought? Is it business won? Positive messaging about enablement. Our comms and marketing professionals are involved in this. This is another best practice that I would tell you. If you find that it's hard to get the message out about security to really build this culture that we're talking about, think about using some of your colleagues that are very good at communicating. Think about using your PR people, your marketing people, enabling your salespeople to have this conversation with their customers. I think that's going to really drive it. Newsletters, internal meetings, you name it. So some questions to maybe ask yourself, does your organization see security as a competitive differentiator, or is it just a cost center? If it's just a cost center, let's have a conversation, because there's some things we can do to help change that perception. And then, CISOs, as an example, are being asked to participate in sales cycles more often. So are you prepared for that? Is your security team built to actually have conversations with customers? Ask yourself those questions and think about that. So at the beginning, I didn't really mention, but there was a picture that was actually showing us at a soccer game. So my family and I, we went to a soccer game in Portugal. We had the just amazing time to being able to watch Benfica. And at the end of 90 minutes, Benfica was the one that won. And so if you do everything that we're talking about, cloud security for the win, build your team out, think about your partnerships, understand your roles and responsibilities, right? And just build an amazing culture of security for your team. And I know you'll be successful. So once again, I'm Clayton Smith, security specialist over at AWS. I'm so glad that I've been able to spend this time with you. I welcome any questions that you have. Please reach out to me directly via the QR code. And thank you again for welcoming me into your screen, your living room, wherever it may be. But thank you for your time. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of the presenters.